So far we've talked about how adolescents consistently state that their parents remain really important to them, and that most adolescents remain emotionally close to their parents. This emotional closeness may go up and down, but there's still that attachment to them. And a very influential theory focused on the emotional relationship between parents and children is known as just that. It's called attachment theory. This was originally developed by a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby. What he said is pretty straightforward. He said that there is a need for vulnerable young members of the species to stay in close proximity to adults who will care and protect them. Okay, nothing too unusual about that. So what he's saying is that children need a strong emotional attachment and a strong physical attachment to at least one caregiver when they're young, and that this is really critical to their personal development. Now, an American psychologist named Mary Ainsworth took this further. She agreed with attachment theory, and she described two general types of attachment, specifically for mothers and infants. She said what we want is for infants to develop a secure attachment, and I'll explain why this is important for adolescents in a second. So she agreed with Bowlby. He said, yeah, attachment theory is really important, and what we want is for infants to develop a secure attachment. And what she said was, this is her exact words, was that they use the mother as, quote, a secure base from which to explore, end quote. So it's like they can explore and they want to explore and they can do that in a healthy way, not just physically, but psychologically as well, because they have that secure base to start from and that secure base to go back to. So that when everything's going well, they seek physical comfort from their mom if they're frightened or threatened or something's bothered them. But because they have that secure attachment to their prime caregiver, their attachment figure, and they know that their attachment figure will meet the needs they have, they feel secure enough to explore their environment because they know if something goes wrong, they can go back to that secure relationship. So a securely attached infant will be easily soothed by their attachment figure. And just off the top of my head, you can see this with infants and toddlers, can't you? That they're all upset, and as soon as they see their mom or dad or whoever their prime caregiver is, they settle down. So they develop this secure attachment to their prime caregiver. And I don't mean to be sexist here, but Mary Ainsworth did specifically say the mother or a woman. When the caregiver is sensitive to them, they pay attention to them so they can tell when their child needs to be soothed. Unfortunately, sometimes an infant will develop an insecure attachment. This is when they don't really feel confident or secure in exploring their environment, and they end up resisting their attachment figure's comfort and consolation. So with an insecure attachment, obviously this is not what we want to happen. These kids do not feel oriented to their attachment figure. For whatever reason, they don't develop a secure attachment with them. Instead, they're actually independent of their attachment figure, not just physically, but emotionally as well. So when something's going wrong, they don't go back to that attachment figure. They don't go back to their mom or whoever the prime caregiver is. And that's because the caregiver is likely to be relatively insensitive, and they don't watch for when they need comforting or assurance. They don't respond in the appropriate way, and they kind of reject their needs. Maybe the attachment figure withdraws from them, or is just not available to them. And yes, most of the early research and theory on attachment theory focused on infancy. But this is why it's important for this course, because it's widely believed, according to attachment theory, that this attachment formed with a primary caregiver formed the foundation for attachments to others throughout your life. This is why the theory is relevant to adolescence. In the course of interaction with the primary caregiver, who is usually the mother, the infant develops like a first model that they'll have for the rest of their life for how they should interact with people and how personal relationships should be. So to put it simply, the relationship you have with your primary caregiver will end up affecting the relationships you have throughout your life. So yes, essentially, you can blame everything that goes on in your personal life on your mother. Just kidding. Um, I'm sure Freud would love that. But actually, this is why Bowlby himself quoted Sigmund Freud when Freud said that the relationship with the mother is, quote, the prototype of all future love relations, end quote. So going back to infancy, Freud said that the relationship a boy or a girl has with their mother essentially teaches them how relationships should work, how personal relationships should work. So although attachment theory focuses on infancy and early childhood, it's relevant to us discussing adolescence because the kind of relationships you have with others in adolescence, whether it's friends or teachers or people you work with or romantic partners, will be shaped for better or worse by the quality of the attachment to parents a person experiences in infancy. So the early attachments you have, or lack thereof, will have an effect. This is attachment theory, but how well does it hold up in research? Well, first of all, on one hand, this is one of those things that we don't really need academic research for, do we? If a person has a good relationship with their parents or a prime caregiver, that will have a positive effect compared to if they have a poor relationship with them. If the relationship with their caregiver is secure, supportive, encouraging, reliable, all those other good things, a young person is more likely to be emotionally happy and to feel good about themselves. Do we really need expensive research to determine that? I don't think so. So the effect of a secure attachment with parents will likely cause a variety of positive outcomes. The better your relationship with your parents during infancy, the more likely the relationship will be positive during childhood, and the more likely it will be positive during adolescence and into emerging adulthood. So attachment theory, I think, makes a lot of sense, just in a common sense kind of way. It makes another point focused on how being independent and self-directed is related to being close to your parents. So attachment theory says that being independent or autonomous is connected to developing relatedness, so feeling close to parents emotionally. So let me explain this because it might sound a bit confusing. What attachment theory says is that being close to your parents, emotionally speaking, doesn't result in you being more dependent on them. Instead, having a close parental relationship that's positive makes it more likely that you'll be able to develop a healthy sense of independence from your parents as you grow up. I'm picturing a diving board here. So it's like having that positive, close relationship gives you that spring you need to launch yourself in a good way. As you can tell, I like to have a visual picture in my head. I just find it really helps and really helps to explain things and make sense. So keep this phrase in mind, a secure base from which to explore, and picture that diving board. Research indicates that young people, adolescents who are the most independent and the most self-reliant, they know how to rely on themselves, have close, affectionate relationship with their parents. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And there have been many, many, many longitudinal studies on attachment. Longitudinal means the studies take place over time, which is good for us. And the textbook goes into quite a bit of detail speaking about them. They provide kind of a mixed bag for these predictions. There's no one clear picture. So certainly read about all the studies in the textbook. What we can say, kind of summarizing everything, is that most attachment researchers do not state that infant attachment alone is the foundation for all later relationships as originally proposed. It's still important. It's still really important. And it establishes tendencies that will likely come to fruition. but these are going to be affected by later experiences. These tendencies will be modified by later experiences in childhood and in adolescence. So yes, infant attachment will have an effect, but that effect will be affected by the experiences of your childhood and the experiences you do or do not have in adolescence, and so on. For example, attachment theory would recognize that it will be affected by conflict during adolescence. For a variety of reasons, adolescence can be a difficult time for relationships with parents. I know we all are aware of these stereotypes about parents and their adolescent children. You know, the teen yelling, "Nobody understands me," as they stomp into their bedroom and slam the door, and parents ready to pull their hair out. If we go back several classes, remember that G. Stanley Hall referred to adolescence as a time of storm and stress. Certainly, it's not an idyllic and peaceful time for many people, but adolescence is not a time of inevitable hostility with parents either. It's pretty much agreed that viewing adolescence as this kind of battleground with parents is an exaggeration. Makes for good teen movies, though. When an adolescent is having problems with their parents, or their parents are having problems with them, what do they usually fight about? Well, think about this stage of life and what's going on with the adolescent. There's a lot going on cognitively, physically, emotionally, socially. They're maturing sexually. Parental authority changes. Even if parents never use any kind of physical punishment, physically speaking, parents are not as intimidating as before because the young person is bigger. Authority also includes basic decision-making things about things like clothes, hair, friends, curfew, their bedroom. Parents are more likely to continue to see these as part of their domain of authority, while the adolescent is more likely to see them as part of their domain of autonomy, part of their personal choice. And you know, it sounds so neat and tidy when it's explained that way, doesn't it? Nothing resembling the stress these issues can cause. Something as simple as wanting to wear your hair a certain way and your parents saying no, which seems like a pretty minor issue in retrospect. And at the same time, parental authority is probably being questioned. You have this young person who is cognitively thinking in a less childlike manner. And so at the same time as they're questioning parental authority, they can disagree and argue verbally much more effectively. So the parents are trying to maintain their authority, but the young person is trying to develop independence. And this is usually highest in early adolescence. But again, conflict with parents is not inevitable. In a traditional culture, it's pretty unusual for parents and adolescents to have these conflicts. That we in our society seem to think are almost expected. But even in highly industrialized traditional cultures, such as Japan or South Korea, conflict in adolescence with parents is also less common than it is here. And this makes sense. If you're raised in a culture where the status and authority of your parents and other people older than you is constantly emphasized, it's much less likely for you to question that authority, even during adolescence when you might want to be more independent. So overall then, yes, attachment to parents is going to continue to have a really strong effect in adolescence, even though it starts way back in infancy. So let me try to summarize all of this up here. We've covered a lot of material. Some chapters are longer than others. Some just seem to have more particular details than others. Started off looking at historical change in the family and the three main things that really do directly affect the experience of adolescence right now. Lower birth rate, longer life expectancy, and urbanization. And then I went right into family life and family systems theory. I want you to really keep in mind that every single relationship in the family affects every other relationship. So if there's any kind of disequilibrium, even if it's expected, even if it's not necessarily a negative disequilibrium, it's going to take time to get back into a state of calm. And there's certain things that are going to have an effect on this. Parents during midlife, everything going on with them at that point. Um, we have all these things affecting the family system. Sibling relationships, there's different kinds of sibling relationships. That's going to have an effect. Extended family relationships are going to have an effect. And the extent of the effect of each one of these is going to differ depending on the kind of society you grew up in. We have these variations in parenting. Unfortunately, we mostly only have research regarding Western styles of parenting and how these different kinds of parenting affect each child in the family, because being in the same family does not mean that you're parented in the same way. Parenting in other cultures is quite different, and we went into detail in terms of parenting in India. And we have this idea of attachment theory and how early attachment during your life will continue to have effect on you in adolescence and later. So, as always, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. I tend to get back to them quickly. And please don't forget to do your quiz for this week.